Hi guys, welcome along to a Flightsim basics tutorial. For those of you who've been following the channel since I started it earlier in the year, you'll know that I've not been particularly, in fact I've not been at all active the latter end of summer coming into autumn just because of work. I had planned to sort of put a hold on things until earlier in the early next year when things quietened down a bit, but I've been active on the Facebook pages, chatting to people as I always try to do even when I'm out of work. Got into a few interesting conversations, particularly regarding X-Plane and the ZIBO, and the very basic tutorials. There's a lot of people out there asking for advice on the initial setup and stuff like that. Loads of people following Flight Deck to Sim now. He's doing fantastic tutorial, a lot of live streaming as well. But as he confesses himself, he doesn't get into too much detail about the ins and outs of switch locations and the names of things and stuff like that. He expects a certain amount of background knowledge necessary in order for people to follow his videos, which I think that's fair enough. So what I'm going to try and do is aim a lot of this content at people who really are starting out and don't necessarily even know what an APU is or how to align the IRSs and that sort of stuff, which is where I see a lot of beginner newbie pilots getting unstuck and asking for help. So hopefully this will address some of those issues. I'm going to try and break it down into the initial startup, up to engine start and push, and that'll be the first video, and then we'll do the departure and stuff at a later date, as I am pushed for time just to get this first one in today, but we'll see how it comes along. So here we are at Madrid. We've planned for Madrid to Palma Mallorca today. It's Ryanair 6 at Foxtrot Alpha. We're here on stand on the, where are we? Let's check the charts very quickly. We are on Terminal 1 here at Madrid. So if I pop into the aircraft and we'll show you the charts and have a quick look at where we are first of all. I've got most of it set up through the Avi tab. That's the charts, the flight plan and stuff like that, just so that I can drag it in easy enough and show you. When I'm actually flying, I use a combination of obviously got X-Plane with the ZIBO mod. We've got active sky controlling the weather, sim brief for the flight plan, and then Navigraph for the charts. And I use a laptop and an iPad next to me, as well as the monitors on the actual PC itself. But for today, I've just linked it all in through the Avi tab on the tablet here, so that I can easily show you the different things and the different steps and what we'll be doing. So this is a complete cold and dark setup. There is absolutely nothing connected to the aircraft at the moment, other than I've just loaded in the charts and the flight plan into the Avi tab here. So we'll go through a complete cold and dark setup. I'm not going to do, I omit some of the steps for example, Flight Deck to Sim will do, like the fire warning test and the circuit breaker checks and stuff like that, just because I don't plan to fly with failures. But you can check out some of his videos of a proper cold and dark setup when you get a bit more familiar with the aircraft and see how a real world captain or a real world pilot would go about doing all the safety checks and stuff. But if we dive in here quickly, I'll just show you what we've set up so far. So in the Avi tab, I've got Navigraph, my Navigraph account linked to this already, so that allows me to go into the airports. In the search function, you can type in the 4-letter ICAO code for the airport. So we're here at Madrid, Lima Echo Mike Delta, and then searching for that, that'll bring up the airport entry. If you've got your Navigraph account linked through the tablet, you'll see this little button here, which isn't there if you haven't linked your account, and that just allows you to then search for the charts. So you can go in and go through all the available charts for the airport. So we're here on stand on Terminal 1, which is where Ryanair will be operating from if they're flying in and out of Madrid today. Quite a long taxi here, so we've got the taxi routings and stuff drawn up as well here. We'll be departing, usually in Madrid, unless the wind is absolutely against it, we'll be departing from one of the 3.6s. We've got the parallel runways up here. The 3.6 lefts and rights are your normal departure runways. The arrival runways in standard operations are the 3.2s down here. If you're unfamiliar with any of this, I have got some tutorial videos for how to set up your SimBrief flight plan, how to select your routings and stuff like that, and get your call signs. I recommend, if you're not flying on VATSIM, if there's no weather or ATIS available or control available, just check on Flight Radar 24. Go to the airport of choice and you'll see what they're doing at that present moment in time. For example, the wind here at Madrid today is 150 at 3 knots. So that would give you actually a tailwind component on departure from the 36s. However, up to a prescribed limit, they will accept a tailwind component on departure from Madrid in order to comply with traffic levels and noise abatement procedures, terrain clearance and stuff like that. So in normal operations, where allowed, they will actually depart with a tailwind component. So if you're not sure, just check on Flight Radar 24, see what's going on in the real world, and you can match your procedures to that. So we've got the charts. I've also in the charts section here, I've downloaded the PDF of the flight plan from SimBrief. The SimBrief download, if you target it to the correct folder, I think it actually does it automatically for you as well. It just allows you to then bring your flight plan into the tablet, so you've got it there in front of you in the aircraft. So we'll be referring back to the charts and referring back to the flight plan quite a bit as we get into the setup. So that's the paperwork side of things. The other thing we do, referencing some of the information on here, as we need to actually fill in the weight and payload and the fuel for our flight today, which is obviously something that a real-world pilot wouldn't do. They wouldn't enter that information into the tablet and load the fuel that way, because they just request the fuel as required for the flight, and the ground crew load it for them. But obviously for us in the sim, that's what we need to do. So we'll be looking at some of these figures here as well, just to load that up. In fact, we may as well go ahead and do that now before we do anything else. So we're looking at these two figures here. We're looking at our zero fuel weight. We want to make sure that the figures in the aircraft match or as close to that as possible, so we get accurate performance data. And our block fuel required for the trip, 6.4 tonnes. So on our flight plan today, we've got 62.2 tonnes zero fuel weight, which is just a little bit under our max zero fuel weight, so we're quite heavy. And then our block fuel required for the trip is 6.4 tonnes. So we need to remember those two figures, 62.2, 6.4. If we go to our fuel weight and balance tab, we want this figure here to say 62.2. So what we're doing is adjusting the payload figure in order to get the zero fuel weight to read what we want. So we just need to take 0.2 off of this figure here. So we'll end up with 20.8. Entering that should give us 62.2. And we said 6.2 as our block fuel. So I'm going to take 6.5 tonnes, 6.5 tonnes, just give us a couple of 100 kilos reserve. Extra there. So that's the aircraft sort of set up, that's the payload and the fuel loaded on. Also, you can see on the diagram here, it shows you centre of gravity, it shows you where the fuel's loaded to. So there's only fuel in the wing tanks at the moment. So when it comes to the setup later on, we turn our fuel pumps on, we won't need the fuel pumps for the centre tank because there's no fuel in there. So that's also a visual reference as well. It's quite useful. We can check it out on the instruments as well, but it's always quite handy just to see it there. So we now need to get some electrical power to the aircraft, because I say we are absolutely cold and dark. There's nothing going on here at all. So if we go initially up to the overhead panel, and you'll be looking for the DC electrical power section, which is this section just here. For me, I've got a physical Cytec switch panel attached to the sim. So my switches for some things like the battery and stuff are physical switches. So they're external from the sim. They're an actual physical control. But basically, all you're doing is just looking to switch the battery on, which would be that button there. So I say mine is a physical switch. So flick mine on, and we just pop the cover over as well to make sure that's guarded and can't accidentally be flicked off again. Come down to the centre section here. We pop the emergency lights. We just flick the cover. That will arm the emergency exit lights and cover them so they're guarded. Make sure they're not going to be accidentally flicked on. And then we would go down to the position lights down here on the front of the overhead panel. Flick them to steady, and that just tells the ground crew that we've actually got some electrical power to the aircraft. The aircraft is powered up. If we were taking on fuel, we'd leave the seatbelt sign off, but we'll assume that ground crew have already fueled us up, so we'll pop the seatbelt signs on, so when the passengers come in, they hopefully get settled down in their seats, get their seatbelt straight on. And then the last thing to do is, if we just go backwards from here to the aft overhead panel, this is our IRS section here. The IRS allows the aircraft to track its latitude and longitudinal position in the world, so it knows where it is. It needs to know where it's starting from, so we need to align the IRSs. It takes about 7 minutes, I think, in real world time. In the tablet, you can, in a couple of settings, you can have real world time, so it takes the standard length of time that it would do to align in the real aircraft. You can have short or long as well, depending on your preference. I leave mine to real world. So we take first the left IRS first, roll the switch through a line, you'll see the on DC light come on, go to nav, and you'll see the align light come on there. Same with this one, on DC, through to nav, and then we simply leave those to align, and so they take about 7 or 8 minutes. Depending then on whether you are, I'll just pop outside, whether you're on a jet bridge or whether you are on just a stand with no air bridge, you need to get some AC power to the aircraft, some external power. So as we're on a jet bridge at the moment, actually the aircraft should be taking power from the power on the jet bridge. We can just confirm that by looking at the overhead panel. You can see this light is available here, so that just, if we go in on that, basically just says ground power available. Not connected to the aircraft yet, but it is available to use. If not, we'd simply go down to the, if we were just on a stand with no air bridge, we go down to the tablet here, go to ground services, pop a GPU on there, and that will connect the ground power unit to the aircraft. Either way, we're looking to get that light lit up, and then we simply use the spring-loaded switch there to pop that on, and we've now got AC, alternating current power, to the aircraft. So these are the switches to couple various different electrical systems to the AC bus. At the moment we've got the ground power on, and then when it comes to it, we'll pop the APU on, take the APU generator onto the bus, and that will automatically decouple whatever you've got selected. So we're on ground at the moment, and we'll leave it on ground power until we've got the APU running, ready for engine start. That is essentially the overhead flow done for now, until we get to before start flows. Depending on the outside air temperature, you may want to stick the APU on early, or you may get ground air, which you can also call up from the tablet here. You can get an air cart connected to the aircraft to get some pressurised air into the aircraft. It may be necessary. It is, what are we today, 25 degrees outside, so it might be nice for the passengers just to get air connected to the aircraft, in which case we go across to the right hand side, look at our duct pressure gauge here. You can see that's rising up. That's the air conditioning duct pressure, or the air supply duct pressure, and that tells us there's pressurised air being delivered to that duct, and then what we do with it then is up to us. At the moment the air conditioning packs are in the off position, but if it's warm we might want to pop the packs onto auto. You'll see that pressure drop a little bit as the packs start to draw some air from the duct, and that'll just put some pressurised air into the cabin, start to cool it down a little bit, just to keep it nice and comfortable for the passengers. That is a non-essential step at this point, but as we're in Madrid and it's still the back end of the summer, it's quite warm out there, so we'll do that to keep the passengers nice and cool. And then it's down to the FMC. So at this point, one of the pilots will be outside doing the walk round, and it'll be down to the other pilot to go and begin the data input into the FMC. You can see here we've got a nav data out of date message. It's just because it's gone over into September now. You need to be familiar with what the nav data is if you're not already. One of the great things about Navigraph, other than the charts that it gives you, it also gives you your navigational database, which is all the waypoints and stuff that go into the FMC to create the flight plan. Mine's only out of date by 1 month because I keep mine up to date with Navigraph, and it's only just ticked over into the next period. but you would use Navigraph just to update the database on there, to make sure you've got a fairly current one. It doesn't have to be exactly right the very latest. It is quite good to keep it up to date. It is important to make sure that whatever database you've got in the aircraft, your SimBrief account, if you're using SimBrief to generate your flight plans, you can link that to Navigraph and get the correct data cycle there as well. As long as you're planning your flight plan with the same data cycle that you've got in the airport in the aircraft, you shouldn't run into any issues. So for now, I'm happy to accept that that's one cycle out of date. So I'm just going to clear that out. Then we'll go into the FMC proper, and the first page we come to is the ident. You can actually see here the nav data cycle that we've got. So the AirAC cycle, which is 1908. So that would have been year 19, month 08, which is valid August 15th to September the 11th, I think, of the year 19. So from the 12th of September, that cycle would have been out of date, but it's close enough. We're happy to accept that for now. I can update that at a later date. But we planned our flight plan with the same nav data cycle, 1908, so we shouldn't have any issues with missing waypoints and stuff like that. So we're happy with that. We'll accept that. We'll go to the POSINIT page, the position initialization page. This is how we tell the aircraft where it is in the world in order for it to know where it goes to when it starts moving, so the IRS can track where it starts from. We're at Madrid, Lima, Echo, Mike, Delta, and we just pop that in the reference airport. That's the generic sort of centre fix for the airport. That won't be specific to where we are, that won't be exact, but it's close enough to get the IRS started usually. But what we can do is if we go to next page down here, you'll see the GPSs are online already, and they've picked up our exact position. They've triangulated using 3 or more satellites to know exactly where we are. So if we line select with the line select key on the left here, that figure, it'll drop it, copy it into the scratch pad, and it'll stay there when we change pages. We go back one to previous page, and if we line select against this line here with the empty dot, with the empty boxes, it'll paste that figure into there, and that's now updated the IRS position to our exact location. You can see there that it's very slightly different to the airfield sort of standard position, if you will, the default position. Not too far out, but it's better to have it as accurate as possible before we move the aircraft. It's also important to note that we don't move the aircraft until those IRSs are aligned, otherwise the whole process has to start again. But it's going to take us more than 7 minutes to set the aircraft up, so that's good. So we're happy with that. We're going to go to the route page next. And this is where we fill in origin, destination, and so on. So because we've told the POSINIT page that we're at Madrid, Lima Echo Mike Delta, automatically knows that's where we're going to be navigating from, stands to reason. So it's populated the scratch pad with that data already. So all we need to do is just pop it into the origin box, and then we're going to Palma Mallorca, Lima Echo Papa Alpha into the destination box. Now I use the SimBrief flight plan downloader. It's up to you whether you type it in manually. I know Flight Doctor Sim in his videos, I think he actually does it manually because that's their company SOP, Standard Operating Procedure. They actually type all the routing in manually. But it does give you the option with X-Plane and with SimBrief to download the flight plan to the correct folder. Once you've done that in the correct format for the aircraft, then you can simply take the code, which is normally for almost all the aircraft in X-Plane, the origin ICAO code, destination 01. So we go Lima Echo Mike Delta Lima Echo Papa Alpha 01, enter that into the company route, and that will have populated the route fields for us. If you haven't got that set up, you don't want to do it that way, or you're not sure how to do it, not to worry. You simply do what I'm going to do now anyway, which is go next page, and instead of having any data in here, these would all be blank, and you just pick up your first waypoint from your flight plan. So we go, in fact I'll just drag that over there. If we go to charts, our flight plan is probably, where are you? There we go. So our routing here, ignore this first bit because that will be your departure, your SID information for the airfield. So our first waypoint on the routing is Nando, then the upper Mike 871 airway to Godox, and the Godox 2 kilo arrival for Palma. So we're looking at the first waypoint, the first physical fix on the routing, which is Nando. So we would simply type Nando into the to box because we're going to Nando first, then the airway, the upper Mike 871, which goes from Nando, and the fix that we get off that airway is Godox. So we pop in Nando, upper Mike 871 to Godox, and that is essentially our routing. It's a very short routing today, nice and easy. And all you would do is pop in fix, airway, fix, airway, fix, airway, and so on down here. If you have a fix and then another fix without an airway in between them, it simply means direct to. So you just pop in the fixes and omit the airways, and you just go direct to. But that essentially tells us that we're going to pick up the upper Mike 871 at Nando, fly all the way to Godox, and then pick up our arrival into Palma. So we need then to get onto the upper Mike 871 at Nando from our departure runway. So we've been to flight radar 24, we've had a quick look, we've seen that our departure runway is going to be 36 left today. 36 right in fact from Madrid. You obviously do the same for your departure point and work out what your departure runway is going to be, and then you need to find in the charts a departure that links your departure runway to your first waypoint. So by looking through the charts, we've ascertained that we need a Nando departure because our first fix is Nando, and by looking through we found the Nando departures for runway 36 right, which is going to be our departure runway. So that's linking our departure runway to our first fix. And then if we look down here at the actual chart itself, we can see there's a couple available, and what actually in this case, it will usually tell you on the chart, the 1 Delta is unusable during the daytime between the hours of 700 and 2300, and the Nando 5 Whiskey is usable. The Nando 1 Delta is usable between 700 and 2300, and the Nando 5 Whiskey is usable between 2300 and 700. So because we're taking off during the day, in between those two times, we're going to be using the Nando 1 Delta departure. Fairly straightforward. Also, something to look at here whilst we're on the chart, what it says here is our initial ATC clearance. If you're not flying under VATSIM, or in fact if you are flying under VATSIM and you're flying from an airfield that publishes the initial clearance on the chart, that's something you want to take notice of. So we'll come back to that again later on when we're doing our setup, but just to bear those things in mind. So we're looking for the Nando 1 Delta from runway 36 right here at Madrid. So we're going to pop that into the FMC. We go back to the FMC, going to go to our departures and arrivals page. I tell you, that's a lie, that's a complete lie. Before we do any further, we need to actually activate and execute the routing. So if we hit activate, you see the execute light pops up there, just execute that, and that's now inserted into the FMC. Now we can go to our departure and arrival page and the index, and that will tell us for Madrid, our departure. We click on that, and we are departing from, it's easier to do it the runway first because it reduces the number of SIDs you've got available. So we're going from 36 right, so if we select 36 right first, and that will reduce down the number of SIDs that are available because they're now the only ones relative to that runway. And we're after the Nando 1 Delta departure. Click on that. There's no transitions to be aware of, so that's actually straightforward enough, and that's available and executed. So now we have our departure and our routing put into the FMC. Nice and straightforward. Go back to our routing page, and if we just go across now, we can see the Nando 1 Delta to Nando, and then the airways to Godox. We'll worry about the arrival a little bit later on. So we can go to the performance page, Perfinit, performance initialization. This is where we need to go back to our OFP, our operational flight plan, and get those figures again that we put in. So what you typically get in real life is a load sheet come through from the dispatcher, So the figures in the actual flight plan may differ slightly to the ones on the load sheet. So the load sheet you need to go with because that's the final document that's brought by the dispatcher. But of course, in this case, we don't have a dispatcher because we're in a sim. So we can take, as long as we've set those figures, we can assume these are our load sheet figures. So as long as the figures that are in here are the ones that go in the FMC, that's what we need to take into consideration. So we're looking for a zero fuel weight of 62.2 tonnes, which can go into the FMC, like so. And then we're looking for our reserves and our cost index. So getting back to the tablet, this is why I keep the flight plan on a separate monitor, so I don't have to keep dancing between the two. But it's easier to show you this way. So in the charts, let's find the right page. There we go. So we're looking at this figure here. So our fuel planning section. We've got the trip fuel, the amount which we're going to actually burn, our contingencies. What we're looking for are these two here. So our alternate is basically 1.5 tonnes, and our final reserve is 1.1 tonnes. I'd probably make that 1.2 to be safe. So that is enough fuel to shoot an approach in Palma, shoot the missed approach because we've had to go around for weather or whatever reason, fly to our alternate, Barcelona in this case, and then still land with the absolute final minimum reserves on board of 1.1 tonnes. So our reserve is actually those two figures combined, so it's going to be 2.6, I'd say 2.7 tonnes to be safe. So that is the figure, the combined figure of those two goes into the FMC. So 2.7 tonnes goes into the reserve. Cost index you can find up here on the right hand side on page 1, just here where it says CI cost index. It's generated one from SimBrief, which is perfectly usable, 53. Yeah, I happen to know that Ryanair, I think, use 40 as a standard cost index across most of their flights. So you can keep the figure from SimBrief, it's absolutely fine. Or you can, if you know that the airline that you're flying uses a specific cost index on a certain routing or across their routes, you can stick with that. So I'm going to go with 40 because I know that Ryanair use 40. 53 is a perfectly usable figure. Basically what it does is it generates a lot of algorithms and computations and stuff within the FMC. Not sure that's a word, if I'm honest. But it generates a lot of data within the FMC to manage the fuel burn, the maximum speed, the rate of climbs, the maximum altitudes and stuff like that based on the wind and the fuel burn altitude and stuff. There's a balance between how quickly you get there and how much fuel you burn. So I can pop in 40 there, and that is basically the trade-off between how quickly we get there and how much fuel we burn. So if you popped in a cost index of 100, it would be more concerned about how quickly you get there and less concerned about the fuel burn. Conversely, a cost index of 8 will be much more concerned about how much fuel you burn and less concerned about how quickly you get there. So we can see at that cost index and our weight, it's telling me that 366 is our flight level of choice, our preferred flight level. It doesn't take into account the wind actually in that figure. So what we filed for on the flight plan is flight level 320 initially. Now this was generated automatically by SimBrief. It's actually wrong, and I don't know why it's doing this. We are flying a route from Madrid to Palma, which is going essentially the average, the mean track from departure to destination is easterly. Easterly traffic should be flying on an odd flight level. So if you're flying from the west, if your average sort of overall track from departure to arrival is going easterly, you should be travelling at an odd flight level, so 33, 35, 37. If you're going the other way, you're going westerly, you should be going on the evens, 32, 34, 36. So I should actually be at flight level 330, but SimBrief has given me the wrong one. So it's important to note that when you generate your flight plan, just look over it, see if there's any inconsistencies or anything that's slightly wrong about it. And I happened to notice that when I was doing the setup. You can go back in and input it manually. You can edit the flight plan and type in the flight level, the cruise level that you want. I'm just going to note that it's wrong and take flight level 330. And you'll see then it gives me the execute light pop up. There's a couple of more bits here that we just need to look at as well before we do that. So if I go back to we're going to get all this information from the flight plan. So if I go to the flight plan, we go to, I'll zoom out there a little bit, go to the next page, here we go. So if we go to the next page, we've got all our waypoints listed here for the flight plan. So we're going to look here at our top of climb waypoint here first of all, when we reach our cruise altitude, and we're looking at this figure here, this one in the middle here, which is P04. It'll say P or M depending on the weather, and it's relating to the temperature. So at a given altitude or flight level, there's a set of standard data. So on the ground, the standard ISO or international standard atmospheric conditions are 13 degrees, pressure of 1013 millibars. For every flight level out 1,000 feet that you climb up, that temperature will decrease at a fairly standard rate. So there's standard conditions, the temperature is fairly predictable. So at the moment it's predicted to be at cruise altitude 04 plus 4 degrees on standard. What it actually is, it'll be minus 45 degrees. So that's 45 degrees warmer. That's 4 degrees warmer than the standard for that flight level 320. All we're concerned with is this figure here. So at top of climb, plus 04, or it could be a minus, so it would say M something, in which case you'd enter a minus figure. So it's plus 4 degrees. So we remember plus 4. We go down, now we go across pages to our wind information, and we look at the top of climb wind information here. So I'm looking for our level at top of climb. As I said, what I really should have done is gone back and edited the flight plan to have a cruise at 330, because it's 330 that I'm looking for here. But I'm just going to interpolate between the two because there's very little between it. But you're looking for, what you'd be looking for is if you're cruising at 340, you're looking for that figure. 320, you'd be looking for that figure. As I said, I'm actually cruising at 330 because we're going easterly, which because of the way SimBrief sets it up, is not on this actual sheet. I should really have gone and done it properly, but I was trying to cut corners a little bit because I haven't got a lot of time to get this stream sorted. But what we're basically looking for is the wind information at our cruise altitude. There's not a lot of wind today, so I would say it's going to be about 310 at, we'll take a worst case 17 knots. It's in between those two. So in the FMC, let's get over there, shall we? Thank you. It's I'm going to say 310 at 17 knots. So we enter exactly as it was there, 3104/17 into the cruise wind. And ISO deviation in centigrade is going to be plus, what do we say, plus 4 degrees. That goes in there, and that should tell you it's going to be minus 45 outside air temperature. There we go. So it worked out quite nicely. The transition altitude. We going back to our tablet again. We go very quickly to the chart. There we go. So transition altitude, that is indeed 13,000 feet. That is the altitude at which we go from local altimeter calibration settings over to standard 1013 for the flight levels. So depending on the pressure and the weather conditions, the first available flight level on standard altimeter settings will be above the transition altitude. So the transition altitude is 13,000 feet. Anything above that will be in the flight level. So the first available flight level will be 135 because it's the first one above. They go in 500s. They go the first available one above the transition altitude. If it's vastly different pressure and temperature, and there's a body of weather that's really brought the pressure down, for example, then ATC will tell you in the weather briefing, the weather broadcast, the transition level, which will be the first available level above that altitude. We're not flying on Flightsim, we've got no weather today, so we're just going to take 130 as written, basically what it is there. So we just confirm, which should, when you put your departure airfield into the FMC, part of that database should be knowing what the transition altitude is there. So that is correct. So the transition altitude is in there. Everything else is correct. We've got zero fuel weight, the reserves, our cost index, our cruise level. So we can execute that, and that is now activated in the FMC. And then we just need to do our departure planning. So we can go to M1 limit. Now, this is where it can get as complicated or as simple as you want to make it. There are planning apps for takeoff performance for the 737. Real-world pilots have something called the OPT, or the onboard performance tool, which they have on their iPad. And what it does is it takes into account the runway length available, the wind, the runway conditions, whether it's wet or dry, the pressure, the aircraft weight, and so on and so forth, and tells you the optimum performance for the engines. You don't simply ram the thrust all the way up, like you would say on a Cessna or something like that, for takeoff, because it burns a lot more fuel, it stresses the engines and reduces the engine life. It has a lot of environmental impacts like noise and so on, and it burns a lot more fuel. So unless you have a really short runway and a really heavy aircraft, then there's no need to use the full 26,000 pounds of thrust available from the engines. So the first thing we do is we're looking at the outside air temperature. If we go to the centre display here, or active sky, both are agreeing with each other, 25 degrees. So we're just going to pop in /25 degrees into there. That's telling us what the actual outside air temperature is at the moment. And that's automatically activated the full takeoff power available. Now there's two ways we can do this. From watching Flight Deck to Sim, I think that his SOP is to simply use one of the three available takeoff selections here and not worry about putting any temperatures or anything. So you can see the figure is 99.9% N1 at the moment with 26k available. So that's going to produce the full 26,000 pounds of thrust when we select takeoff power. If we derate it to 24k, that means 97.1 N1, which is our rotation of the big fan at the front of the engine. So that's reducing the amount of stress on the engine. It's not producing quite as much thrust, but we've got plenty of runway to accelerate to our takeoff speed, using less fuel, less noise, and so on. There's further ways you can do this with the OPT app and some of the planning tools available. We'll give you a temperature figure, an assumed temperature to put in here. So for example, I'll show you now, we've got 99.1 N1. If I put in, say, 45 degrees into there, it reduces that figure to 96.1. What that's doing is it's saying if the actual outside air temperature was 45 degrees, the air would be less dense and wouldn't be ingesting so much air into the engine, and therefore it would be producing less power. There's a special set of calculations that the app will do for you. I have no idea what they are or how it calculates it, but it'll look at the weight of the aircraft, the runway, the temperature, the wind, and so on, and it'll take all that into consideration and give you a temperature figure. So it might be 36 degrees or whatever it tells you, and it just reduces that maximum takeoff thrust to conserve a bit of engine power and performance and so on. That's the other way. There's two ways of doing it. That's the other way of doing it. From what I can tell, I'll clear that now. Let's delete that out and put the temperature in again. Here we go. From what I can tell, I think a lot of carriers simply use one of the three selections. So I hope that makes a bit of sense. It's a little bit more technical, a little bit more complicated, but suffice to say that if you've got plenty of runway available, you can quite happily derate to 24k, which will conserve a bit of engine life, fuel and performance and so on. And that's that. That's all we need to do on that page. So we've done that. We can go to takeoff. and again, this comes into flat performance and so on. So the apps will also give you the D-rated takeoff, or what power setting you need for takeoff. It'll give you your optimum flap setting, which almost always in the 7.3 is flaps 5. Very rarely is it anything other than flaps 5 unless you've got a very, very short runway, very heavy aircraft. It'll give you the C of G, which it also does in the tablet as well on here. But if we, because it's a clever little system here, if we simply double click on there or click on there, it brings that in for you. It tells you what your takeoff trim should be optimum as well, and it fills in your V speeds. All we need to do is accept them. Now, if we were using the actual APT app, and I can tell you that Flightsim does his calculations on there based on the real world app, as well as what the tablet's telling him, as well as what the sim's telling him, and he's always been very pleased with how close these figures are. But they would take the figures from the app rather than from the FMC for performance. It's suffice to say that I'm pretty much every video and stream I've watched of his, and he's a real world pilot, so he knows what he's talking about. These figures have been within one knot, I think. So he's more than happy with how this calculates the V speeds and stuff. So we've got V speeds of 142, 143, 149, and that 149 is an important figure because we need that set in our FMC for our departure. Sorry, in our MCP for our departure on the autopilot, which we will do in a second. So 149 we need to take into consideration. We need to remember that figure. We also just go back to the charts very quickly, and we need to look at our maximum altitude, which we talked about before. Initial ATC clearance, unless otherwise advised by VATSIM controller, for example, when you get your clearance, look on the chart, find your initial clearance, and climb maintain 130. So we've got a speed of 149, we've got an altitude of 130, we've also got an initial track. We're on the Nando 1 Delta departure, so our initial heading 016. So we'll be climbing out to almost just upwind of the runway, and then right onto the 016 heading. So we can actually pop that straight in to our MCP. So if we go across to the instrument panel now, so what do we say? We've got 149 is our V2 speed, 016. And this outer ring here limits the maximum bank angle, so below 10,000 feet we can have it all the way to the right, so that would be limiting it to 10 degrees of bank all the way over to 30 degrees of bank, so that can go all the way to the right. And then 130, so that is our MCP setup. We've got 149, 016 and 13,000 as our initial climb, so that will ensure that we don't bust our climb restriction before ATC have cleared us further on in the climb. We can also pop the flight directors on at this point and verify we've got FD on both sides there, which we have. And then the auto brake, which is just here, we pop that to RTO, rejected takeoff, and that just means that if we do have to reject the takeoff for any reason, it will automatically apply max braking for us. The last thing we need to do then before engine start is set up the nav aids for the departure. You can choose to omit this step if you wish. We're using an FMC departure, so it will be, unless you've got any failures set up and you've got it set to fail anything, it will be a straight departure on using LNAV and VNAV, or following the FMC directions. But in the event that anything did fail, we can set up the traditional VORs in order to fly the departure manually or using raw data. So we'd be looking at, for the Nando 1 Delta departure, we'd be climbing straight ahead on 016 degrees, and we want to be at or above 2,600 feet, passing 5.8 DME from the Barajas VOR, which is this one here, BRA, Bravo Romeo Alpha. That's our first point, of course. We want to be passing 2,600 feet at nearly 6 DME from that VOR. So we could tune that, we could put a fixed ring in depending on what we're feeling. There's quite a few VORs associated with this departure. And looking at our climb performance and the elevation of the airfield, we'll be well clear of that figure. So I'm going to leave that one out, and I'm going to put this in because, very importantly, we're going to be flying 016 degrees until we intercept the radial 222 from the Romeo Bravo Oscar VOR. So we want 113.95 tuned and the radial 222 in nav1. After we get to 10 DME from that VOR, so when we get to within 10 DME of that VOR, above 7,000 feet, out above 7,000 feet, we're going to make a right turn. It's an intercept turn because we're going to be intercepting the radial 008 from the Pareles Papa Delta Tango VOR at or above 130. 130 is currently our clearance limit. So I hope that will make sense. It's a little bit complicated, but basically it means that we're going to be taking off, flying a heading of 016 until we intercept that radial 222 from the Romeo Bravo Oscar VOR, flying it in towards that VOR on that radial until 10 miles, 10 DME, and making a right turn to intercept that radial to that VOR. So that's our departure. So if all else fails, and then we'll be outbound on the 107 once we get to that VOR as well, to Nando. If all else fails, we can fly conventionally. If the FMC decides to quit on us just as we're taking off, we can fly using those VORs, using the needles. So we're going to pop those two in. So we've got 113.95222, 113.95, and don't forget to transfer it to the active window. And 222 goes into the course. And lastly, the Pareles Papa Delta Tango VOR 116.95 and 008. 116.95 goes into box 2 on the first officer's side, which is our nav2 box. 116.95, transfer that to the active, and 008 is the radial for that. 008. 008. There we go. So that is the automation, the FMC, MCP, and the nav aids all set for our departure. I hope that all makes sense. It is quite in depth, but hopefully it gives you an idea of where everything is within the aircraft. A couple of last things to do. We need to look at active sky and check what the wind's now dropped. It's at 0 degrees, so from the north at 2 knots. It's nothing at all here. 25 degrees still. And the pressure's 1019. Now you'll see here on the PFD we've got a figure of 29.92 inches. In the US and some parts of the Middle East, they fly on inches of mercury instead of hectopascals. It's the same thing. It's a calibration for the altimeter. 2992 is standard. If we go up here to the EFIS controls, the Electronic Flight Information System controls, this knob on the right here has got an inner and outer ring. The outer ring just selects between inches of mercury, which you'd fly if you're in the States. Flick it over to the right. Hopefully, if I zoom in, but you can see that going there. Flick that over to the right. You can see it says on the other side HPA, hectopascals, which is the measurement calibration we use for the altimeter in Europe, in fact most of the world in fact. So we're using then the inner knob, this one here, to set that to what is forecast at the moment, which is 1019. So if we look at our display here, bottom here where it says now gone to HPA, you can see if I flick between the two, inches, hectopascals. We want to roll that up to 1019. Verify here that the altimeter is reading approximately what the airfield elevation is. So we're now on what we call QNH, which is the when you're on the ground, when you're actually physically sat on the ground, it will give you that will be reading the airfield elevation. You can see that from the chart. Probably tell you at the top of this one. It's the airfield chart. That's the figures. Certainly tell you on a. Let's go to a departure quickly. Sorry, let's go to an arrival. It'll tell you there, I think. One of those arrivals. Look at any of the charts. It's got an arrival there. We get airport elevation 2,000 feet, give or take. So within 1 hectopascal of that figure, that is what your altimeter will read on the ground when you've got the correct Q and H set. So that was basically 2,000 feet, which it is. So it's within 1 hectopascal of the correct altitude. So that is our airfield elevation. So that's how high the airfield is above sea level, and that's what we calibrate our altimeter to for departure, Q and H. So if you actually, we're already at, so that's reading 2,000 feet. So if you look at that departure chart, and it said at 5.8 DME from the Barajas VOR at or above 2,600 feet. We've actually only got 600 feet to climb in order to make that height restriction. That's why I'm confident that we will be at or above 600 feet on that departure. Something like a prop aircraft probably wouldn't have the performance to be able to do that. Again, hope that makes sense. You'll get used to it. It comes naturally eventually. It takes a while to get used to, but you expect it to be reading 0 on the ground, but it's not. It's reading the airfield elevation. There we go. So we've got the takeoff reference page up on the captain's or the pilot flying's side, FMC. On the pilot monitoring side, you have the legs page, and what you do is a gross error check just to have a quick look at the route distance. So if we go back to our flight plan, let's go back a couple of pages. Probably be on the first page, won't it? There, ground distance 369 point to point, or routing to routing, without the departure and arrival, which we put in 369 nautical miles ground distance. So if we look at, if we go very quickly to our progress page, there we go, 350. So that's a gross error check. Tells us that we've not put in an erroneous waypoint down in the middle of South Africa somewhere, and we're going to be disappearing off. Also, our fuel quantity on arrival, 4.2 tonnes, is well above our minimum. So we know we're going to be burning a good, safe fuel burn to allow us to arrive with our minimum reserve fuel. So we'll leave that on the init page, the takeoff reference page, and we can start finally getting the aircraft ready for our push and start. So we'll go to the overhead panel next. We'll do our before start flow. So we're going to put, first of all, we're going to start the APU, the auxiliary power unit. It's a small jet engine in the tail of the aircraft. It started electrically, an electrical starter. Once it's started, it provides AC electrical power and pressurized air for the air conditioning and the pressurized air engine start. So we'll initially, it takes a little time, because it's a jet engine, it takes a little time to spool up, so we'll just pop that on. We see the low pressure light, spring loaded switch, so we go to the start position, hold it for a second, release, and you'll watch the exhaust gas temperature rise up as it puts fuel into the system and starts that jet engine up. So while that's happening, we'll do the rest of our overhead flow. So starting at the top left, you can flick the yaw damper on. Got no fuel in the centre, remember, from the tab. We'll check that when we set our fuel, so we can just pop the wing tank pumps on, watch the low pressure lights go out. The DC power section of the power monitoring is not really necessary now. Got the battery on, that's all we need. Standby power, all that is auto and guarded. We don't need to worry about any of that. Ground power is currently on the bus, so we don't need to worry about that. And this is the rest of the bus. So you just see that light pop on there. That's our APU electrical power. So if we watch what happens now, if we spring load those, that connects the APU left side power and disconnects the ground simultaneously. Do the same with the right side. So now we have the APU running, supplying electrical power to the aircraft. If I pop it back on ground power, you'll see those Was it automatically disconnected my ground power as well? That's interesting. I should go to that very quickly. Go overhead. There we go. Shouldn't have done that. It's because it was because I didn't have a GPU selected from the tablet. I think because I'm on an air bridge power, it didn't allow me to recycle it. Basically, what it does is if I pop the APU generator on the bus, it disconnects ground power simultaneously. If I go back to ground power, the APU is then disconnected but still available. Hope that makes sense. So we'll pop it onto APU power, so the ground power is now redundant, and then we'll carry on with the flow. So up here, these are just panel lighting controls. Emergency exits are already armed and guarded. The seat belts are on. The cabin's not yet been secured. We haven't had the attendants come through and tell us the cabin's secure, so we'll leave that off. That's switching the up position. Up to the top here, the window heats can all come on. We leave the probe heats off because they actually physically heat metal probes on the outside of the aircraft, so they're heated in flight. We don't want any of the ground crew burning themselves on those. Pop the hydraulic electric pumps on. Now we've got AC power to the aircraft, those pumps will go on. They would probably have been on for the walk round actually, just to make sure we've got no hydraulic fluid leaks anywhere. The anti-ice isn't required. The pressurisation reads 0, 0 there, so there's no cabin altitude, no diff pressure. In fact, it would be 2,000 foot cabin altitude because we are at 2,000 feet on the ground here at Madrid. This is the section that often catches people out as well, so it's just take a bit of time to go through this. So for the moment, the trim air can stay off till after start. Recirc fans can stay on auto. We've got duct pressure from the ground air cart. So if I just go over here, disconnect the ground air cart, go overhead, you see that duct pressure drops. If I pop the APU bleed on, that's now bleeding pressurised air from the APU, because it's running, into that duct and allows those air conditioning packs to function. So we're fully self-contained now, electrically and air, we're all on the aircraft. So that bleed is open, the packs are auto. The isolation valve can stay open until after the engines start. And the last thing we do is just to make sure we set our cruise altitude in the pressurisation section here, flight level 330. And then the landing altitude for our arrival airport in Madrid would be, Palma, would be dialed into there. Haven't got it to hand, so I'll do it in the cruise. As long as it's done before we start descent, that's fine. What we'll do very quickly then, because this is one of the unique features of flying on the sim, is we have to plan our own pushback, make sure that that's all set up. So we're in the ground services section, go to better pushback, go to pre-plan. You can see I haven't already done it from this stand. So what we're going to do, we're going to push back onto the taxiway here. We're just going to be facing to the west to taxi out to the active. So we just want ground to push us back that way. So we just select that as our stopping point, hit enter, and it will pop the plan into the better pushback planner. And if we also go request pushback now, give it a second to think. So now it's going to request the tug to push to come up and connect to the aircraft, and that just means that it'll be there ready. If it doesn't crash into the building, it'll be there ready to go as soon as we request the pushback. Anyone coming from FSX or P3D, you'll remember that GSX, if you've been using that, once it's connected, it starts shouting at you repeatedly until you disconnect the brakes. He'll tell you when he's ready to go, but he won't keep moaning at you, which I think is quite a nice touch. So finish our before start flow on the overhead panel, and then we're ready to actually get going. So the last thing to do before we start the aircraft, until we start the pushback, is to make sure we've got enough pressurised air available to actually start the engines. With the packs running, that duct pressure will be too low. There won't be enough pressure at the duct to bleed into the engines and start them. So we turn the packs off, watch the duct pressure rise, and then we put the anti-collision light on down here, and that is now the aircraft ready to push back. We've got the red beacon running on the top of the aircraft. It tells ground crew that we're about to be out, we will have engines running fairly soon. And the pressurised air is now fully available because the air conditioning packs are off. Last thing I'll do is just to come around here and shut the door, secure the cockpit ready for flight. You can imagine the cabin crew have come in and told us that everyone's seated, the cabin's secure, so we'll set that. Ground crew's now told me that he's ready, all connected and good to go, release the parking brake. So I've got a block time of 15:22. Brakes released. I've got rudder pedals attached with toe brakes, so I'm just pressing both of them in to disconnect the brake. Alternatively, you just click the parking brake, which is down here on the front of the pedestal, on the rear of the throttle quadrant here. So he's commencing our pushback, and we are ready to start engines. So we're going to be starting with number 2 first. That's just standard. You can see, we go quickly up here, in the engine start selection here, we've got an ignition selector, we've got a left-right igniter. Typically they just cycle between trips, so for this trip we're using the right. When we land in our destination we'll flick it to the left so that they get used evenly. So all we do is we simply clear left, clear right visually out of the window, and then we pop the right engine start switch to ground, and then we come down here to the engine instruments and we monitor first of all on the lower display. We've got N2 rising down here. We'll be watching the N2 and we'll also be watching the M1 start to come up as well. And then we're looking for a figure of 25% on the N2. And when we've got 25, which we have there, we grab the fuel cutoff selector up into the idle position. And we just then verify that we've got N2 rising, we've got fuel flow displayed, we've got EGT rising as that exhaust gas temperature heats up with the fuel going into the engine. And we've got N1 rising. N1 is the big fan at the very front of the aircraft. We'll go outside and have a quick look at the front of the engine there. So we can see that big fan. That's the M1 fan spinning up there. Interesting graphics going on with the exhaust. There we go. So we're looking then for a figure of 56% N2, which we have, and that will have cut out the starter. Lights have gone out. We just verify we've got good oil pressure and temperature, which we have nothing in the red, and that's a good engine start. Do the same again. So engine 1, you'll see that's also flicked automatically back to the auto center position there. So engine 1, again, over to the ground position, down to the displays. Got N2 rising. We've got M1 rising. %, the fuel going on. We've got fuel flow, EGT, and M1 rise. So the pushback is complete. We can set the parking brake, so we just literally click on that. That's the parking brake engaged. Looking for 56% on the N2. There it goes. You can hear that click. The start valve open light goes out. No low oil pressure lights. Oil pressure and temperatures are in the green. And we've got 20 on both M1s. We've got about 390, 385 on the EGTs, and 59.1 on the N2. So they're absolutely spot on. 2 good engine starts. So we can go back up to the overhead. Ground's done and good. He's going to disconnect the tug and disappear off to our left hand side in a minute. And we can do the after start flow. So now we need to get the engine electrical systems onto the bus. So these generators switches here, remember at the moment we're on APU electrical power. If we flick those spring loaded switches, the APU is automatically disconnected. Still available because the light's on, but we're now on engine electrical power. So the engine generators are on the bus, the APU is automatically disconnected. Those probe heats can come on now. You can see the lights go out. The trim air switch can go on. Confirm that the recirc fans are auto. Packs can go to auto. You watch the duct pressure drop away. Isolation valve closed. Isolation valve auto. Switch in the middle position there. That's closed. That's auto. APU bleed can go. We verify the dual bleed light has gone off. And then the APU can be switched off, and you see that APU available light goes out there, and that is our overhead after start flow done. So we'll come down to the main panel. So we know from our departure prep in the FMC that we're going to be taking off with flaps 5. So we can select flaps 5. Mine's a little switch on the yoke, but you could do it whichever way manually here if you want to grab the flap lever. We want to select the lower display unit using these two buttons here to system, just there, and then you'll see the flight control positions are displayed on the lower display unit. And we're just going to do a flight control check. So using the yoke here, I've got a yoke, side yoke connected, so I'm just going to do the ailerons first of all, so full left, centre, full right, centre. The elevator, full up, centre, full down, centre. And the rudder, this one down here, full left, centre, full right, and centre. And then we, using the same button, not going back to the engine display, but using the system button again, press that, and that will actually turn the display off altogether. The reason for doing that is that if any of the parameters on the engine page, any of these parameters, go out of limits during any of the phases of the flight, it will automatically pop up there. So having a blank screen suddenly flash up data will attract your attention a lot quicker than something just flashing up on what is already a screen full of information. That just helps to bring your attention very quickly to anything that goes out of parameters during any phase of the flight. So we can then verify before taxi. We've got the auto brake RTO. The flaps are 5 required, 5 are selected. We've got green light. The TCAS, we've not on VATSIM or anything like that, so we've not been given a squawk code to go into the transponder down here. If we were given a squawk code when we were on VATSIM getting ATC clearance, we would simply dial that in here. So let's say we were given 1472, we just type in 1472 like that, and then the position of this switch relates to what state the TCAS is in, or the transponder is in. So it's in standby at the moment, it's doing nothing. Typically, if you're not flying online, you can leave it in 2000 in Europe, or you leave it in 1200, I think, in the US. When we're on the ground, we're going to pop it to alt off. It's the first position here. Alt off is working as a position report, but it's not transmitting any altitude information, any Mode Charlie information. That way, if we're taxiing near to the approach end of an active runway and there's traffic on finals, they're not suddenly get a TCAS resolution advisory because we're in the way, and it won't upset them on their final approach. So we leave that on the ground. It means that if the airfield is equipped with ground surveillance radar, they can see our position on the ground, but we're not transmitting any height information, so it's not going to upset anyone who's in the air. So that's on TCAS on alt off, and then we simply we'd call up for taxi. We'd brief our taxi routing if necessary. Well, we always brief the taxi routing. So we go back to our charts, go to the taxi routing charts. Gonna have a quick look. We're down here on Terminal 1. We're taxiing all the way up to 36 right, which is all the way up here, way past Terminal 4. So it's going to be quite an extensive taxi. So what I'm going to do is, as I said before, I'm going to break the videos up now. So this is going to be where we leave this video, which has got us all the way to before taxi. And then we'll pick up the next video as we start the taxi out to our departure. So we'd brief the taxi before we get going. So we're going to go from stand here. We'll just push back down here. So we're going to go. Where are we? We're not going to make Mike Bravo there. So we would go ahead on to on the apron, up to Golf 2, through Golf 2, left onto Alpha 9, is that correct? This is, yeah, this is correct. Up onto Alpha 9, and then follow the Alphas all the way up to this big intersection here, making a right turn on Alpha, and then we take one of the mics, probably mic 16, mic 17, 18, take one of the mics across all the way to the eastern side of the field, and then we would go up the Novembers or Bravos, up to Bravo 9, Bravo 10, across Bravo up to the hold at Yankee, ready for 36 right. It's quite a long taxi, so as I say, we're going to cut the video for this tutorial there. That's got us all the way to engines running, and then the next step will be actually getting the aircraft into the air. So you can catch me with that one in part 2. Thank you.